Welcome to the July 30th Weber County Commission meeting. I know Commissioner Jenkins should be here shortly, but we're going to go ahead in the interest of time get started with our agenda, and we'll start with an invocation from the attorney's office. I don't have a name here, but it looks like Brian. Please come forward.
Our Father in heaven, we're grateful for this beautiful day. We're thankful that we could be gathered here together to participate in local government, and we're grateful that we live in a free country that allows us the opportunity to do so. Please guide us and bless us in the work that we have before us today, and these things we pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. We'll now have a Pledge of Allegiance from Taylor Christensen, and I'll turn the time back over to Chair Jenkins. Go ahead.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I apologize. I let the time get away from me up there. Thought of the day, Commissioner Harvey, it's up to you.
Okay, great. You know, for our audience, this last week, Ogden City enjoyed their annual Pioneer Day celebration. They did a wonderful job. There were lots of activities every day that were centered around things that remembered Pioneer Days. We were fortunate enough to participate in the parade, the three of us together. This is the first time, or the first parade, that the three commissioners have been together, as far as I can tell. It's certainly in my tenure here, which is about 2.5 years. But we all rode in a wagon that was pulled by a set of match mules that was Alan Pfister. And we appreciate Alan and his coming and driving those mules down the street. They had a lot of, they were right in stride, and he did a great job driving them. We just really appreciate that. But as we also want to call your attention to another great community event that's not just in Ogden, but the event that takes place for all Weber County. It's so to speak, a party for us, and we call it our Weber County Fair. This year, we have our great junior livestock program. This is a program where Weber County youth participate in raising cows and sheep. This year, goats and pigs. Well, goats are new this year. We have, I can't tell you the exact number of kids that participate, but I can tell you that local businesses spent over $600,000 last year. And that goes directly into the pockets of Weber County youth that they can use for education. So I don't know of another county in the state that local businesses actually put money in the pockets of working youth. And so with that, I'd ask you to join me in giving the local businesses a round of applause for that. I invite you to come out to our Weber County Fair, which is starts on Wednesday the 7th and goes through every day, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday the 10th. Lots of great activities this year during the fair, and that opens at 11 and concludes at 11, so 11 to 11 each day. And so if you'll just mark your calendars for that, there are promotions where you can get in for next to nothing or about nothing, depending on the promotions. But if you'll just go to Weber County Fair, you can do that to hashtag Weber County Fair, and there are a lot of social media medians that you can pick that information up and get all kinds of information. But those are my thoughts today, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Harvey. We appreciate that. You know, it's interesting. Here about 7 weeks ago, they invited us out to the fairgrounds for a kind of a pre-fair meeting. And I know at that meeting they fed us all these different meats that they had. And so we had beef and pork and some mutton, and we had goat. And anyway, when it was all said and done, I remember thinking, now I know why beef is the king of meats.
You didn't have any bison.
That's true. I didn't have bison. Good point. But I had goat. I had a couple of goat. And then I ate that beef, and it just melted in my mouth. All right. Thank you, Commissioner Harvey.
Sure.
Okay, at the beginning of our meeting, we open it up to see if there's any that came to comment or address us today. We would like to open this up for that. Unless you're here for the public hearing, we will address those items separately. So other than the public hearing, if you're here to address us today, please step forward and spend your time. Right now's the time. I don't see anybody moving. All right, then we'll close that and go to the consent items. The consent items, items F are today. Warrants 1902 through 1913 and 441388 through 441611 in the amount of $814,314. Request for approval of purchase orders in the amount of $6,958. Request for approval of beer licenses. Request for approval to set a date for an August 6th, 10 o'clock public hearing regarding amendments to the operating and capital budgets of Weber County for 2019. I think that's Scott Park that requested that. Okay, anyway, that's our consent items. Questions, Commissioner?
No, I'm good with them.
We've reviewed that. The beer license, by the way, Commissioners, is something that we've had a little experience with now for the last 25 years. There was some recent legislation that was passed, but now it's in the county's favor. That'll work out well for our fairgrounds and our public facilities. So we're grateful that we have that opportunity, and I just wanted to bring that up. But with that, I would, Mr. Chair, if you're ready to accept a motion, I'll make the motion that we accept the consent items, item F like Foxtrot, 1 through and including 4, as read. After we hear from...
I'd second that after we hear from Ricky.
Okay, Ricky?
Okay, so this week we issued 14 purchase orders for $407,000. 44% of that amount, or $179,000, is for the roads department. That was primarily to purchase a loader as well as some road supplies. 31%, or $126,000, is for the library, and that almost exclusively went up to the Ogden Valley branch floor covering, replacing their carpets. And they also bought some books and materials as well. 11%, or $45,000, is for the health department, and that is to replace the carpet. 6%, or $26,000, is for our GIS department, and that's the annual software maintenance. As far as checks, we paid 234 checks this week for $814,000. 20% of that amount, or $164,000, was for the transportation tax funds that flow through us to the cities. One was Pleasant View City for about $100,000 for Skyline Drive and US 89, and then the other was for Harrisville, and that was for Larson Lane. 18%, or $148,000, is for the fair, and that's for operating cash. 13%, or $105,000, is payments that we make on behalf of Weber Housing Authority, the monthly housing payments that they make. And then we had 2 for 8 that accounted for 8%, or about $65,000. Jail, that went to utilities and food for inmates, and then for the roads department, they purchased asphalt. We had a couple purchases for 6 and 7%, around $50,000. Elections paid for the printing of the ballots for the primary elections, so that money will be refunded by cities. And they also had to pay the annual software maintenance for the elections tabulation software. And then the county made its quarterly payment to the USU Extension Service. That's it.
Thank you. So the only question I had on there, and I reviewed it with them this morning, was this one for Health Department for Stedman Recreation, 16,000. Number one, that's a side-by-side, and it's outside of the county. All was bought appropriately on the
State contract.
Contract. Bugs me.
I'm going to make a comment on this, and it's probably,
Now's a good time.
yeah, now's a
Gonna
good
get into
time.
it?
Well, we might get into it.
Go ahead.
No, I really, really support your idea of buying local. I love it when we make transactions, especially within Weber County. It benefits the county, it benefits the city by which they're sold. But personally being involved, I tried to buy 2 side-by-sides out at the fairgrounds and all but pleaded with the local dealers. This was for a gym. They're an electric side-by-side utility vehicle that carries garbage and things like that. I tried, and they were, one case was $1,200 and the other case was $1,800 higher. And I went out, I went personally to the stores and I said, we have got to have, I got to have you guys do better on your bidding after the first time. And they just wouldn't do it. Well, this is our price. If you want it, that's what it is. Now, maybe the management changed. There was only one gem dealer in Weber County at the time, but I pleaded with them. I didn't just ask. I pleaded and I couldn't get them to do it. So I don't know how to, running my own business, I kind of like having the business local too. So I don't know what else you do. I don't think
No.
it's good business though to pay 10% more, and that's about what it is, just to go in the county. I'd like them to be competitive, but those are my experiences, and they were from probably 4 and 5 years ago. Today's atmosphere could be different, but those were my personal experiences.
Well, you hate to see them go all the way to Twilla, but they did. And other than that, that's my only comment.
So we're not going to get into it.
Any more than we have, that's right. All right. So if that's the case, I'm willing to accept a motion.
I'll make a motion that, we've got a motion in a second.
Well, that's true. We did have a motion in a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? They're approved. Thank you very much, Ricky. We appreciate that. Okay, action items today. Item 1 is a request for a cooperative agreement by and between Weber County and Utah Department of Natural Resources, Division of Wildlife Resources, for Weber County to control phragmites in the wetland area throughout the county. Taylor Christensen. I'm interested to hear this. Taylor.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So the Utah Department of Wildlife Resources would like to include us in their grant for controlling phragmites, and I'm here for your approval to enter into that agreement.
But what does that mean when you say include us in the grant?
This grant was written for us, Cache County and Box Elder County, to all work together. The main initiative is to treat the wetland areas within our county that are controlled by the county. We're not going to be treating state land controlled land. I'm going to try and do all of the drain ditches and all the retention basins within the county.
So how do you treat those now? Because when they were using Roundup, that wasn't terribly effective. Did
It's
they come
not.
up with new things?
Roundup still is the best option. A lot of it has to do with timing. You spray phragmites in the fall as the plants are going dormant. That's the best time to spray them. You have to use a real high chemical ratio. And then we're also going to try doing some mowing this winter, and then a retreat in the spring.
That's good. I'm anxious. I'd like to see you do a little better job on these phragmites. They've got into some of our drain ditches on the edges of the road.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
them dang things, they'll jump 50 yards and then start again. And I know it's those
Yeah.
long runners that go down the ditch.
Yeah,
That's the dangest
absolutely.
plant I ever seen.
Yeah, they are, and we're going to try and either rent or maybe even purchase a piece of equipment, an attachment to put on the end of our Mini X so that we can reach down in the bottom of the ditch and mow it right all the way to the bottom rather than just as far out as
Right.
my mower will reach, and I think that'll help us a lot.
I'm glad you asked that question, Commissioner. Because we had a devil of a time, even on the infield of the racetrack, that frag. If you don't I have heard the chemical just doesn't work.
Yeah.
Unless you hit it when they're just going dormant.
Yep, you have
It's
about
tough.
a 3-week period where it'll actually show some results, and it's kind of tough to get all of it done within 3 weeks, but
We
We're
burned
gonna
we
do our
burned in
best.
March. We did that and then we burned and they still came back.
yeah,
It's just, wow.
yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
I'm ready. Commissioner
Yeah,
Ford?
a couple questions for Taylor. So Taylor, I understand that we're also seeing some Phragmites up in the Ogden Valley area. And I had a email actually last week or the week before that said there's some funds set aside for Phragmites. I believe they set up to 85,000. Are you aware of that grant and
Yes,
how that's going to apply? Because obviously, as we look at this implementation of this weed control board, which I'm hoping will be in existence in the next 30 days or so,
Yeah.
that's something that we need, or they need to consider. Can you update me on that?
From what I understand of that other grant that you're speaking of, that is run through UDAF, the Utah Department of Food and Agriculture. Laura Lee Cox is the local
Right.
representative.
Uh-huh.
The way I understand it is that grant is more aimed towards helping the private landowners to control the Phragmite on private property, to try and help keep it from spreading into the drainage systems, the natural waterways, versus this grant that I'm in part of is for kind of more of the public, the property that we're in charge of.
Okay.
So, but I will be working with Laura Lee on that project as well.
Yeah, I think we have a meeting set up with her to discuss that. I'd like to have you involved with that if
Yeah.
you could.
Yep. As far as I know, it's Thursday morning at about 9 o'clock.
Okay, great. And so is there a way to get rid of this with spraying and mowing, or is this kind of like Dyer's Wood, which is here, we're here to live with it?
Right. I don't think we're going to get rid of it. I mean, it's been around for over 100 years, and to say that we're going to be the ones to get rid of it, I think would be a little negligent. But I think if we can control it and keep it from spreading, keep it from getting into Pine View, and keep it from getting into Willard Bay and all these other major resources, then I think we're doing a pretty good job.
Agree. Mr. Chair, you ready for a motion?
Yes, I am.
So I would move to approve the cooperative agreement between Weber County and the Utah Department of Natural Resources for Weber County to control Phragmites in the wetland areas throughout the county, as presented by Mr. Christensen this morning.
I'll second that.
We're good. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. It's unanimous.
Doing a great job for us.
Thanks,
Thank
Taylor.
you, Taylor.
We appreciate it. Next request is approval of contract bond between Weber County and Yoguini to have guinea pig yoga at the 2019 Weber County Fair. Good night.
Yes.
Ashton Wilson.
So it's Yogini. I'm sure you
What's
guys
that
have
called?
seen Yogini.
Yogini.
They have goat yoga, and we're going to have guinea pig yoga. So they're going to do a show every day at 5 o'clock, and it's just $25 a day, $100. The gal approached us about it, and we thought it would be a fun addition.
Yeah, that's good.
Do you have any examples you can show us here today?
I don't, but if you watch our social media, we will.
Okay. Well, that's just another attraction. I'm sure that attraction will help draw some more kids, and so every day at 5 o'clock.
Yep.
Wonderful. So, Mr. Chair,
Yeah, do you want to approve that?
I'll make a motion that we approve Yogini at the Weber County Fair this year.
I'd second that.
Okay. You want to go on record as voting for this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Voting for, participating maybe into something different.
Very good. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I'm pro.
Yogini.
For Yogini. It passes. Thank you. All right, Ashton. The next one's you too. Approval for contract binding between Weber County and Amanda Hosel for to judge the Fiesta 4-H horse show at the fair.
Yes, so this is another real straightforward one, just $100, and the Fiesta 4-H show is on Wednesday the 7th, so that'll go all day, and she'll be one of our judges.
Great. Any questions, commissioners?
No, I'd make a motion to approve contract between Weber County and Amanda Hosel for a judge for the 4-H Youth Horse Show during the 2019 Weber County Fair.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. All
Thank you.
right, Ashton. You were pretty quick today. Next item up is a request for an interlocal agreement by and between Weber County and the following cities: Huntsville City, Marriott Slaterville, Uinta City, and Washington Terrace City. This is the Sheriff's Department.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Tell
How are
us
you?
about this. How are you this morning?
Good.
Good.
So these are just interlocal agreements that the Utah State Tax Commission has asked us to get signed by each city that we collect beer tax on behalf, and it just needs to go through the approval process to go through each city and municipality and Weber
So
County.
this has to do with the beer tax that we collect.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, Fire Commissioners, any questions on this?
I don't have any questions on this, Commissioner.
I don't either.
Either of you want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the interlocal agreement by and between Weber County and the following cities: Huntsville, Marriott Slaterville, Uinta, and Washington Terrace.
Second.
Very good, and let it be known this is for the beer tax. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you.
Thank you so
Appreciate it very much. All right, next item is a public hearing. I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Motion to adjourn the public meeting and convening a public hearing.
Second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 We're now in a public hearing. Charlie Ewert, you going to talk to us about this?
Sure, I am happy to. Thank you, Commission. Okay. So I try and bring things together at once if I can, just for efficiency purposes. And we've got three things on the agenda here. The first one to talk about is culinary and secondary water ordinance amendments. A little while back, we were approached by Hooper Irrigation Company, a request to amend the code. The basic premise of the request to amend the code was to add in requirements to hook into existing local secondary systems if that secondary system is willing to serve, can serve, and is within a certain distance of the subdivision. As we were looking at that, we realized we've got other issues in our subdivision code regarding water that we probably want to take a look at. One of which is the approval of dry subdivisions, which what that means is we would approve a subdivision conditioned on them finding a water source, like we do this with private wells. But they wouldn't be required to prove that water source prior to the approval of that subdivision. So we wanted to just vet some ideas with the Planning Commission and the County Commission to figure out how to best approach this. Before I dive into it, I want to let you know that both Planning Commissions, Ogden Valley and Western Weber, are very concerned about water policy and about how to go about the best way to provide for both secondary and culinary water, but both planning commissions rejected this proposal. Not because they didn't like the ideas that were presented in it, but because they want a more holistic approach to water. So I'll talk about that in just a bit. So the secondary water provisions, as requested by Hooper Irrigation, it clarifies water connection requirements. Under our current county code, secondary water connection is only required when the Culinary Water Authority requires it. You guys know the county is not a culinary water authority, doesn't operate or own any water resources. And so we rely on these private and quasi-public water districts and companies. Oftentimes these water companies will require a developer hook up to a secondary system, but those water companies don't have any control oftentimes over that secondary system. And so they're conditioning their service of culinary on the existence of secondary. And the reason for that is because watering the lawn takes a lot of water, and they may not have the water storage or capacity to actually serve those secondary services. One of the challenges behind that is, how does the county go about doing this when we're not in the water business ourselves? How do we make sure that there's a secondary system that's operating and functional in order to provide for or accommodate for that culinary water company's requirement? So one possible solution is to look to the existing secondary water companies that are out there and ask them to essentially bear the burden. Hooper Irrigation has actually asked to bear that burden. So if you're within a certain distance, 300 feet of a secondary water system, and that's 300 feet times the number of lots within your subdivision, you'd be required to hook into that secondary system if that secondary system can serve. So if it's a gravity feed ditch that's uphill, downhill, it'd be too hard to get the water back up, so that probably wouldn't work out. But if it's pressurized and they're willing to serve, it'd be required to hook into them. Other requirements is to identify standards to which secondary systems should exist. One concern that a number of private water companies have brought to our attention, as well as districts, is if they condition their culinary service on access to secondary, and the county or the private water company has no standards to which that secondary system should be built, people are going out and digging a pond and saying they'll just pump out of the pond. There's no oversight, there's no regulatory oversight to ensure that these systems are actually functioning and adequate. But once that culinary connection is made, that culinary company can't shut it down. And so there's kind of a challenge on who owns responsibility to make sure those secondary systems work. And I think under county code and under state law, I think those culinary systems are responsible to make sure those secondary systems work if they're conditioning their service on secondary water. However, do those culinary systems have the adequate administrative resources to enforce? That's the big challenge we have here. I see all of this kind of culminating into a much bigger and broader discussion about water, which I know the Western Weber Planning Commission and the Ogden Valley Planning Commission saw that snowball as well. It's a very big subject to broach, and right now the county's not in the water business. And how close do we want to get to hedge that way? Or do we want to do like what a lot of communities do and say, if you want municipal services, you need to have a municipality to serve that? So just a few things to think about as I move through this.
So did both planning commissions look at this, the Upper Valley and the West Weber one?
Yeah, both did.
Okay.
Yep. As far as culinary water goes, the proposal that you have before you will clarify what culinary connections are required. It also mirrors the 300-foot connection requirement. I know that there was a little bit of debate with both planning commissions on that 300-foot per lot connection requirement and whether or not that should be mandated. There's dialogue about ensuring that there's overarching governmental control because water is important. There's also a counter-argument to enhancing and supporting local control and enabling those water companies to be their own managers and owners and operators and make their own decisions. So a little bit of balance on both sides so you can hear the argument for both ways. Private wells, our current county code allows us to approve a subdivision without ever verifying access to wet water. In other words, we can approve a subdivision without them ever drilling a well and proving pump testing and verifying access to clean water. What that does is that puts the onus on the next owner. So somebody comes in, they buy a lot that doesn't have any proof of access to water, they go, they sink their own well and take the risk of whether or not they can actually access water or how deep they have to go to get that water. So in some cases you've got to go very deep because of the geology of the area.
Charlie, what this does, sorry for interrupting.
No, please.
This kind of perpetuates shallow, shallow wells, but they put these points down, 20, 25 feet, and try to get some kind of water out of that. And, they actually work pretty good, but they end up taking water that has never been
Allocated or adjudicated.
yeah, they've never filed on, and really don't. They don't. Actually, technically, I think they do need to file on it when they drive a sand point.
Yeah. There's still a point of diversion that's required. So I did chat with the division
Most
of...
people don't. They sink those things
Right.
20 to 30 feet, and they'll just call it a day and start pumping off it.
Yeah. For culinary purposes, that wouldn't be allowed, but for secondary purposes, it could be allowed. But you're right, they should still go through an approval process through the
Well,
State Division of Water
So
Rights.
you say it would be allowed?
For culinary?
No, for secondary.
Secondary.
Under secondary, it's, you're supposed to buy a permit to do that, aren't
Yeah.
they?
Yes. Yeah, they're supposed to have the appropriate water shares.
I don't think most are doing that. Yeah, they just go out and do it. They buy a sample point at a local plumbing supplier and they go out and drive these, and they don't get a permit, and it just flies under the radar.
Yeah, if you're in the Ogden Valley above the dam, you have to work with Weber Basin as well, because when there's a change in point of diversion, they need to know so they can let enough water out of the dam to compensate for the difference. There's a whole host of considerations here to think about. When it comes to those private wells, we chatted a little bit internally about the responsibility to actually drill a well. Are we going to ask a developer to go out and drill a well on every single lot, and what's the expense to that? The argument on one side is that the developer will just recoup his costs on the back end by charging more for the lots. That doesn't always happen. A lot of times the real estate of that property with or without a well is not considerably different. So this really just puts the onus on the next owner to invest in that and hopefully get access to water. If they don't get access to water, they don't get access to a building permit. So do we require the developer to go and sink a well everywhere, or is there something else we can do? I chatted with a few other counties, and in Utah County what they do is they ask for professional review. If a geologist, a hydrogeologist, or a hydrologic engineer can verify that there is access to water in there based off of review of well logs in the area, that is probably sufficient. We're not eliminating the risk to the future buyer, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we're not in the business of 100% risk aversion. Maybe we're just in the business of risk management, which I feel like would be a responsible thing for us to do, to just verify that there's access to water in the area, but maybe not require the drilling of a $15,000 to $20,000 well per lot. So, just a thought behind that. Other considerations, we do clarify what the responsibility of the Culinary Water Authority is. Under state law, the Culinary Water Authority has virtually almost the same approval responsibility and authority for the subdivision plats as we do. If the county code essentially, or excuse me, the state code essentially says if the Culinary Water Authority hasn't approved their water provisions, the county cannot approve the subdivision. So in other words, the Culinary Water Authority could hold up these subdivisions, I think even more easily than the county could. And occasionally, once water rights or shares have been assigned to property, they're then removed from that property before sales is made. And that's not lawful to do. Not a lot of enforcement provisions in our current code that discuss it, and this proposal would help manage that a little bit, so the developer keeps those water rights or shares assigned to that property and doesn't move them around afterwards. It really is about consumer protection at the end run for those who purchase in those developments. So both planning commissions recommended denial, not because they don't like the idea, but because they want to see something bigger, addressing the more county-wide, global scale water issue. In my staff report to you, I offer a request for consideration for approval, not in spite of the Planning Commission's recommendation. I very much appreciate their desire to look at this from a global scale, and I think we should continue to do that. We actually have started to convene a subcommittee. We've got a number of people on that, local water experts, to work through the big issues. But the little issues, we could have some incremental progress towards better water management here in the county. It just depends on whether or not, commissioners, you're comfortable with the policy considerations. If you're uncomfortable with the idea of a 300-foot connection, maybe we kick that to the curb and adopt the other stuff. If you're uncomfortable with the requirement for geology review for a well, maybe we kick that to the curb and look at adopting this other stuff and just hit this incrementally. That would be my preference, but I'm up for whatever you guys want to do on water. Any questions for me?
Sure. Commissioner Farr?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So what you showed us on the screen was what you're proposing, that the two planning commissions denied. Their recommendation was to deny.
They did, yes.
And so their consideration to deny was based on really what issues? Was it the 300 feet or the idea that the county should get involved with water? What
All of them.
All the above?
Yeah, so both planning commissions had substantially the same discussion, even though they weren't even in the same room at the same time having it, which is clear to me that we've got a county-wide concern. Their recommendation for denial, both of them struggled. And after a little bit of struggle, staff recommended to them, if they're uncomfortable adopting it as is, we probably shouldn't draw this out because it is an applicant-driven request. Applicant has paid money for this to be heard. And so in order, responsibility to the applicant and due process, we recommended they just make a decision. But both of them said, however, just because we say denial doesn't mean we don't agree with what's going on here.
Well, I got to be honest with you. I like a lot of what I see here. You know, in my mind, culinary connection, I've had some experience with this. Culinary connections, the water server has the primary say whether they want to make those connections or give authorizations for those connections without proof of secondary water. Most water servers I know of require that now, and I'd hope that that would continue, because one thing that we've experienced in this county over the last number of years is dry subdivisions. And, you know, they're not always dry when people purchase lots, but sometimes they turn up dry after. For example, in Ogden Valley, where we mandate 3-acre lots, somebody sells lots up there, they give them 1 share of water. Well, what they forgot to tell them was 1 share of water is about 20 minutes of water that could irrigate maybe a 1/4 acre.
Yeah.
And then they come apart and the lawsuit starts. So I think this is not only a good issue to protect the public, but it's a good issue to make sure developers put forth the right amount of water, or at least communicate that to a buyer so they're not expecting to irrigate 3 acres of land when it's not going to happen.
Right.
We all know that.
Right.
And we know that water is going to become more and more harder to come by in certain parts of the county. So I applaud this effort. I'm willing to delay implementation for consensus with the planning commission, but I don't want to put this off forever, because the longer we deny this, the more opportunity we have for people to buy lots without adequate water.
All right.
So that's my take on it, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Farrar, you addressed a key concern that this doesn't actually address here, and it's something that the committee I know is going to want to talk about, and that's how much water is going to be required. A different county I worked for and other counties that I looked at their ordinances, some of them do require how many acre feet are required. But you're absolutely right. Weber Basin, when they sign off on how many shares, and the division of water rights, when they sign off on the whole thing, it's not for irrigation for 40 acres. And who's responsible to drive around and ensure that sprinklers aren't put in for the full 3 acres when they've only got a smaller amount of water? And so who becomes the water police after that?
Well, there's an easy way to deal with that issue. Well, I shouldn't say it's easy, but there is a way to deal with that issue, and that comes about with the plat approval and the CCNRs, where you designate the area that could be irrigated.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that people understand that, so that people don't plan on acre of grass or acre of lawn. They figure when they buy that lot, they might have maybe 8,000 square feet, and the rest can be in dryscape. But as long as that's disclosed and put on the plat with the CCNRs, which planning could verify, then I'm good with that. But if you show somebody a 3-acre lot, they envision 2 acres of grass and an acre and a half of horse pasture,
yeah,
with up to the horse's belly, which we know is not feasible.
Yeah.
So I think that just has to be disclosed up front, and that can be handled in CCNRs and the plat process.
Agreed. I appreciate that.
Commissioner Harvey, anything?
Well, you mentioned, Charlie, that one of the planning commission's concern, or each planning commission concern, was that we have better water policy. But explain to me again, when we are not in the water business, how we would mandate to districts through policy,
yeah,
what that is, just so that I'm clear.
Well, this built into that question are, I think, 2 policy questions. Number one, should the county have laws that mandate the operation, management, maintenance of local systems? I think that's the first question that the commission should consider. The second question is, if we do, in what form should that be? We can adopt laws that say we're not in the water business, but those of you who are need to be in the business this way. and create some rules. There are some parameters to which those rules can be, but what we have here would be within those parameters. The question about whether or not, we should, it's one for you guys to, I guess, grapple with. Jurisdictions that have districts that cover their whole jurisdiction, jurisdictions that have their own water companies, they've already got I'm going to use the word monopoly, they've already got a monopoly on this. And they've got the ability to mandate whatever they need to. So I kind of see, as long as development continues on the path that it is in the unincorporated areas of the county, I see the county needing to take a position on this at some point in time, whether or not we are going to be in the water business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You know, it's interesting, Charlie. We're starting to deal with issues that are meant to be dealt with by municipalities.
That's right.
And so I'm anxious to see West Weber and what they're going to end up doing here. But, I'm a little uptight, frankly, right now, that the Planning Commission of these two areas aren't doing their job, I feel. They need to spend the time to get in and identify these issues and make some decisions on them. That's why they're the Planning Commission. And they need to sit down and spend the time to go through these and decide how they want this to look, how they want it to operate, and what they want it to do. Now, I've been through this before. Out in Plain City, we took a good look at water policy, and we contacted Pineview, and they come in and they give us a price to do it, and we accepted it, and we allowed them to come in and put secondary water into the city. Well, it's been interesting following your email strings between Brad Blanche and you guys on secondary water, and to see he's trying to develop and he can't get the water, and then he does get the water, and then we're requiring him to do things that he says we don't have the right to require him to do, but that leaves him with a dry subdivision. And when you're talking, it's one thing when you're talking 6 or 8 lots, but when you're talking 250 lots, it's like, how can you allow a 250 lot subdivision to be a dry subdivision? You really can't do that. It's too big. So it gets really complicated here when they start doing this. So, I would like to see some policies developed here. Number one, I don't necessarily disagree with the concept of a dry subdivision. If it's small lots, like quarter acre, and we don't have any zoning for that in the county, but if you had a quarter or less acreage and you wanted to netscape or xeriscape and put in a few trees, and you could put in a drip system that you could run off your culinary, as long as it was under a certain amount of water. They'd have to sit down and figure this out, so they could water a few trees and bushes, and other than that, it would be rock and
Whatever xeriscape.
yeah, whatever xeriscape they choose to do. I would probably support something like that. I think that's kind of the future, frankly, when you look at these things. But when you look at I really agree with Commissioner Floor. When you look at 3 acres in the Upper Valley that are required, they ought to be required to assign a certain amount of irrigation share to that, or they can't sell it as a developable lot. Because I agree, what ends up happening is they get a small amount, and then the first thing you know, we're in lawsuits, and they're mad at each other, and you end up with acres of weeds instead of pasture and what we want to see develop up there. So these are areas our planning commission has got to get a little tough on. Yeah. They got to look at this. Now, as far as, I think it's time right now to dive into this, because we've got an existing district that said they will come and service a subdivision in our county if we allow them to come and service the county. Well, I think that's something we need to look at now. If we're going to allow this to happen, we probably ought to consider an RFP, frankly, proposals, because Pineview could do that, Hooper Irrigation could do that. Frankly, one of the things I wished we'd looked at in Plain City and didn't, because we just weren't smart enough at the time. I was a little green, but I'm not now. And there's enough private districts out there with extra water shares that it's pretty easy to create a pond or something that's nice that could serve that whole area out there. They could. There's lots of people, lots of these districts who have shares off the Weber River, and they could literally provide it off the Weber River if they wanted to. So there's things that can be done here. And I think we need to look at this in a very broad sense and allow some of these people to be creative and come forth to us and make presentations. That's something I wish we'd done in Plain City, but we didn't. And the reason I wish we'd done that is because the price of secondary water right now, in Plain City anyway, is considerably more than your primary water, your drinking water. It's very expensive. And that's something you got to look at. Secondary water, when you start looking at the delivery system and going through your city and or in our case the county, and laying all these lines and putting it in, it's expensive. It is not a cheap thing to do. And it's something we need to look at. Anyway.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I may, there are a lot of considerations that go into this, and I agree with the comments that you've made. One of the challenges is how to serve the needs of every individual water system, whether it be a secondary system or a culinary system. All of them are managed differently. They all have different personalities and interests. And so if we adopt one law, which is one size fits all, we're going to be offending someone. And that's why I think in the long run, the county's probably going to have to jump into the water business somehow. Maybe it's an RFP for services from a private company. Maybe it's encouragement of a special district for secondary service. Maybe it's the encouragement of an existing water district, which we got a couple out west, to expand into providing the secondary service. I think when it comes to the subject of water, it's going to be really, really hard for us to do this on a system-by-system basis. We know from sewer in the Ogden Valley and elsewhere that if we allow them to keep popping up all over the place, the state gets involved and says, no, you can no longer do this without a body politic, and then they require the county to be that body politic, and all of a sudden we are in the sewer business. I'm concerned water may go that direction, and if it does, then we're responsible for dozens upon dozens of water systems, as opposed to one centralized source.
Well, we've recently been given a visual presentation on a report that we're getting ready to get in the Upper Valley by the Division of Water Quality. And we know that they're going to ding us a little on the effluents that are being put back in the groundwater through the septic systems.
Yeah.
But that report's being held up for some reason, and man, we can't figure it out. It's been about 6 or 7 months since we received that. It was right around the first of the year sometime.
It's about 2.5 years overdue. They were supposed to be done in 2016.
Well, anyway, it's time that we look at that, and we need to start looking at all this. The demand's out there right now to develop a lot of these areas, and not just a little. And so we got to start looking at that. And this is something that needs to be done in the Upper Valley. But in the out west, we got subdivisions going in, and more than just one or two. And these people want to know what to do, and it's only fair that we tell them.
We have a responsibility to those landowners to respond or to get going. So you're right. I think it's high time we move forward.
If you were to deny this today, it doesn't stop the water conversation. Both planning commissions said, keep this rolling. We want to see full steam ahead. So they're still very much invested in getting this done. It's just the details of what you have in front of you is they just didn't have the time or at the time, they didn't have the ability to invest to verify that it's exactly what we need. Both of them thought they needed more, bigger.
My concern, Mr. Chair, is if we deny it, that gives we don't have
Regulation.
I think this is an important issue, not that we need to move this forward, even if we table it and put in a time certain, but to kind of get back to your question, should we be in the water business? Well, Charlie, we're in the land use business by nature, and if we're in the land use business, that means we're squarely in the middle of the water issue, and so they go hand in hand. This is something I've been involved with for my entire career. I don't think you can separate the two. I mean, if you do, then you have issues, and that's what creates lawsuits. It creates unhappy owners, creates all sorts of problems. So I think it's time for us to get involved with it. And I agree with the chair that I'm a little bit concerned that the Planning Commission continues to kick this down the road because they don't want to make a hard decision. I'm going to tell you, I'd like to set a time certain, Mr. Chair, that if they don't deal with it, that it comes back to us and we do deal with it on a fairly timely basis. So
I can support that. I think of something like that.
So if that's the case, I think what we ought to do as a commission is get together and draft a letter to them, but be specific on things we'd like them to cover and look at.
Yeah,
Is that okay?
I'm good with that. Yeah, but I like the idea of, let's give a deadline so that people aren't waiting indefinitely for things to come about. I like action and deadlines. That's a good motivator.
So the application is for us today in this public hearing. What is that for specifically?
So the applicant, Hooper Irrigation, is primarily, their application is only about secondary water. The discussion about culinary water is something that staff, myself, and others in the office have tagged on to the discussion because they go hand in hand.
So what is the request for?
It is to require connection within 300 feet times the number of lots in the subdivision, and to add in standards for how a secondary system should be operated.
Okay, so realistically, they'd like to go serve Brad Blanch's subdivision, and then they want to serve everybody on the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is their way of saying, look, we'll do it, but you got to give us connections so we can afford to do it.
Yeah, and the applicant's agent is in the room. They'd be able to
We'd love to hear from
speak to things a little better.
You.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to open this up to public comment. We'd like to start with the applicant, if he could.
Or the
he
applicant's
she.
agent, yeah.
Yeah. Could you please introduce yourself?
Okay. My name is Greg Sigmiller. I'm with Hooper Irrigation Company. I'm actually a consultant from JUB Engineers. There were several things that were commented on in this presentation that Charlie put together that I kind of wanted to address. The 300 feet per connection is mirrored from the sewer ordinances or laws or rules. I'm not sure exactly what you'd call it, but the statewide rules are that if you are within 300 feet of an existing sanitary sewer, that you hook to it. And that's like I say, statewide, so cities, counties, everybody has to do that. And so we thought, well, it works for sewer, let's try it on secondary. So that's kind of the origin of where that came out. The word monopoly was used. Monopoly is a strong word. And I'm not sure where the checks and balances would be, but it does not make sense for 2 or 3 or 4 different water systems to be in the same street. If you get a leak, whose water is it? You can't test for chlorine, you can't test for the source. It makes sense to have regions and districts where there is a water system servicing that.
I'm not aware of anywhere in the state that they have competing water secondary districts in the same street.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why this came, because we were at the edge of competing with Roy Water Conservancy District with Hooper Irrigation. 2 pipes in the same street, one on one side of the road. If you get a leak, where is it? If you call it blue stakes, whose pipe has been blue staked? It just doesn't make sense to have that. Plus, it's not a good resource or use of resources. You mentioned how much water. That's kind of different depending upon where the water is coming from. Hooper Irrigation has their rules. Wilson Irrigation has their rules. North Ogden Irrigation, Weber Box Elder, everybody has their rules on how much water they think should go to the land. The state of Utah, of course, has their rules, and everybody's kind of around those numbers. But it makes it a little difficult to change shares that have been established for 150 years. You mentioned the Sandpoint. The State Division of Water Rights allows an owner to go down to 30 feet. If they go 30 feet and beyond, they have to have water rights for those Sandpoint wells. So most of those will go 29.0 feet and end right there and use that water. The problem with that, if I've got a large subdivision with everybody having their Sandpoint well, as the water is being drawn down, at some point in time, everybody's going to run dry because they're all tapping into that shallow groundwater. And then you do get into other water rights issues that we don't want to get into at this point. Let's see, there was some Zeroscape. Zeroscape is a wonderful thing. It's environmentally conscious. The problem is the first owner, he'll put in a Zeroscape, he'll put his drip system to his trees. Water systems, culinary water systems, which I represent as well as a consultant, we have a hard time using any of that because you have a backflow issue. You've got some other issues of culinary water lines going out there underneath your fertilized whatever. And so the first owner does the Zeroscape, puts that in. The next guy comes along, he's got a bunch of kids, and he wants to put in grass. So it's difficult to keep that the way it is. It makes sense to have two systems handling two different uses of the water. If there ever is a severe drought, it's easier to shut off a secondary system than it is to compete with the culinary. How do I do that with the culinary system? Which water is going to be drunk by the users versus which water is going to their lawn. Just a couple of things in the original memo that was put together. This whole idea was because of multiple systems, subdivisions being proposed in the Hooper irrigation boundary. One's actually in Hooper City. There are two others in the county area. Wanting to put in a system
on the north side of your district.
Well, Cherokee, of course, is far north. And there is the water ski place.
Okay, I'm aware of it.
Yeah. And by the way, we did the pre-con for them yesterday. And then there was another subdivision just on the edge of the Roy Water Conservancy subdistrict. And so those three items came to me as the engineer and to us as a company. And it's difficult fighting with that because we have bills to pay. We've got a loan with the Division of the Board of Water Resources. We have to pay that loan back. If this system goes to Roy Water and this system goes to private and this system goes to private, then I've got a system with all kinds of holes in it and the inability to pay for that master planning and those standards and that value that goes forward. And so it makes sense that if you're within a certain boundary that you compensate the foresight of other systems and people to become part of that. And I think those were the things that I wanted to. Well, there is one last thing. There are legislation on a state level requiring meters now. I have to put together a plan by the end of the year telling the state how I'm going to put meters in all of my system. You get small systems and that's difficult to do. It makes sense to do that on a larger scale. So I think I just wanted to address those. Do you have any questions for me as the applicant on this?
I have a question. Is Hooper Irrigation, is that privately owned? Who owns that? And are you a district or what are you?
Yeah, good question. What am I?
Yeah.
Hooper Irrigation is a private company, not-for-profit company. And the ownership is in that of the shareholders on the Hooper Canal system.
On the Hooper Canal. So
And
it started out as an open irrigation system.
150 years ago.
Right, and is now going into secondary for some of these areas.
As of about 20 years ago, we started pressurized.
Okay, so this is exactly the kind of system I would have liked to have seen Plain City operate with the Plain City Canal Company. We had the ability to do this. And,
To do an RFP, as you suggested, Commissioner, would be difficult because Hooper Irrigation has shares in that area. Pineview Water doesn't. Their focus is in the northern part of the county, and so it's difficult because the shares having shares of water is huge. You don't start a system unless you have shares,
Right.
and so that little cog in the works there.
your point's well taken. It's not easy to do that. But at the same time, how would we, the law requires us to be fair and equitable when we offer these things. And how would we take that on without offering it publicly to other organizations?
Well, you also made a suggestion about county encouraged things. I don't know if the county, because Hooper Irrigation being a private company, our hands are tied. We have 3 loans right now with the Board
Right.
of Water Resources. We've got to pay that back. We can't get any more. And so we kind of put the onus on developers. And that's a big deal. This particular developer that was talked about today has almost a mile and a half of pipe to put in. It's close to $1 million. Do you put that on him? Do you put that on Hooper Irrigation? Can you incentivize that through county, realizing that it's not just going to benefit one development, it'll benefit everybody along the way and beyond, because now you have water in a new area. So I don't know if there's something county incentivized that would work to help with the same situation.
We appreciate that. Where do you guys get your water from?
Comes from the Weber River, 21st Street area. And,
Okay, so you
just goes
take
through
it out at that...
the forebay there.
Yeah, that's where it goes out and heads out your way.
It goes all the way to Antelope Drive in Davis County on the south. And it's a big system.
That far.
It's big.
Pretty primary ditch, isn't it?
Big ditch.
Well, any other questions? Let him sit down.
Good information. No, I'm good.
As time goes, this is something that's got to happen. Eventually we got to get into this.
Have you been working with the two planning commissions, attending those hearings? And
Yeah, I attended the lower valley. I think I was out of town for the upper valley.
So what's your opinion? Are they headed in the right direction? Are you? You're here obviously to see if this could be approved.
Yeah.
Do you put any faith in them getting this solved in the next 60 days?
60 days is pretty aggressive. I don't know.
Well, I'm a pretty aggressive guy, so.
Yeah, there were some emails that went around putting together a committee. I think Charlie's been involved in that, and we haven't met yet as a committee. I do know that you do have some people on the commission, on the planning commissions, that are pretty sharp. They have some good experience that can kind of pull this all together. 60 days, I think, is aggressive for them.
Does this need further study?
I think further study, you kind of beat around some of the same tough questions. The same tough questions are: do we start a monopoly, quote unquote monopoly? I don't like to use that. The same tough question is, where do we draw the line? Same tough question is, how much do we impose on development to make them responsible to get the water where it needs to go? Another tough question is, what kind of responsibility does the culinary water system have on this? Culinary water, they'd like to just wash their hands of it, excusing the pun, but they don't want to be involved in that, because their job is to provide water to drink and not to mow or to water lawns. So you've got some of the same tough questions that were asked in both planning commission meetings that at some point in time, somebody's just going to have to put the foot down and say, this is the way it's going to be. Sorry, we're going to offend some. Others we're going to make happy.
So you mentioned that the culinary companies just as soon wash their hands, which explain that to me, because the culinary companies that I work with directly understand that if they don't have a secondary system, they're going to be pumping culinary water on an acre of grass.
Exactly.
And so unless it's entirely about making money, most of those culinary companies view it as a valuable resource that they don't want to see go out on a cornfield. So explain, why wouldn't they have an interest in...
Well, they definitely have an interest, but the thing that they don't want to do, Bonavista Water, for example, I mentioned I'm their engineer as well.
Right.
Their policy is that either you have a secondary water source when you come with a plat to them, or we don't give you water.
Okay, which I can appreciate that.
And that's their policy. So that way they don't get into the secondary. So,
Yeah, let me answer part of that too. What happens is these guys size their lines based on residential use. And so if they end up using it for ag, their lines aren't big enough.
Correct.
And so they really go out with that thought in mind. And that's one of the problems with these guys watering their hay fields and everything else on the secondary lines, because they really go out with the idea of having a restricted use for residential lots, not for great big hay fields.
Yeah.
And that ends up causing the same problem in the design.
Yeah. Well, I agree with the policy that you just quoted for Bonavista. I know Huntsville Water's on the same, that unless you can show you have secondary water, we're not going to give you a culinary connection because we don't want to take the chance.
Exactly.
So I do support that, 100%.
Good.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are there others in the audience who would like to comment on this? We'd really love to hear from you.
You know what?
Yeah, I want to do it individually. Yeah. Mr. Blanche.
Mr. Blanche, Commissioners, good morning. Thanks for
Good to
taking the
have you
time.
here.
Thank you. So Brad Blanche, 736 South, 4700 West, West Weber. I sit and listen to the conversation, and I agree with a lot of what's being said. I don't think that the Commission should be worried about offending water districts. I think that you should tell them if there's a standard that needs to be maintained, it should be maintained. Commissioner, for your idea of saying you have to have X number of amount of water and disclose that to the property owner per the CCNRs is a good idea. I can confidently say I don't understand all the water situation in the Upper Valley. I have a pretty good handle on the water situation of what's going on in the Western Valley. And there just isn't enough water to support the amount of development that in that corridor is going to happen.
Correct.
If you turn it loose to a water provider and say, well, whatever your standards are, that's okay, you'll never have enough water. You'll run out so fast. And what I mean by that is my development that I have right around the West Weber Elementary School. It's 60 acres in size. My family members and I have been working on it for 3 years now. We have final approval. We're pretty much ready to go. The challenge that we find ourselves in is that per the standards that the local water provider, Hooper, has, and I want to work with them, so don't misunderstand what I'm saying, for my first phase only, that's 37 lots, it would require 20 and a half Hooper irrigation shares. When you deduct the house footprint, the streets, and such, you're really only irrigating with secondary water just a hair over 8 acres. So it becomes completely unviable to a developer. For me personally, to have to pull the line at my own expense from approximately 1.5 miles away, you're not only talking about $1 million for the cost to bring it over, you're also costing for the additional cost that my family would incur to buy shares to access Hooper Irrigation's system. The other unique situation that we have, and I don't know how you play this into a secondary water conversation for the broader community, is that there are a lot of underground permits throughout the Western Valley. Most of those are abandoned and aren't used. There also are something that I have and my family has, which are a couple surface permits. There are quantity bodies of water defined in acre feet of water and acreage to be used that are on the lower Weber River. Quite frankly, there are a lot of Weber River rights along the lower valley, but they aren't defined bodies of water like the two that I have. Those two defined bodies of water solve my family's problem, but it creates a completely different problem if you force me to hook the Hooper system. One, it's too expensive, I can't afford it. Two, I already have my own body of water, where if Weber County had standards that said, hey Brad, you've got to put certain standards for secondary water in place, then I can use my own water by creating my own secondary water pond to solve this problem for this site. I think, Commissioner Jenkins, there's a whole nother issue that the county should be considering, and we've exchanged a little bit in dialogue about it, and that is these 2 pump rights that are on the lower valley. There's a whole 500-600 acres that's not used agriculturally. It's not being taken advantage of residentially. That if we're smart about it, not to use Hooper Irrigation's water, but to use some of the pump rights or surface wells that are on the lower valley, it could be broadly serviced to serve a much broader area than the water that I currently have defined amounts for. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but it just makes a real challenge. I really like the idea of saying, hey, developer, you have to define in CC&Rs and even in deed, here's the amount of water that you have to have. The second problem that goes with that is, where does the water come from? The current source of water I can't do. I could move my pump right to Hooper's diversion point and give them the acre feet of water. There are priority dates that become problems where I'd get a haircut in doing that. But the second problem that I have is you only have one district there. Who's going to oversee their policies? That says, you don't really need 20.5 shares because you're only irrigating 8 acres. You only really need 8. So it's those kind of things that give me heartburn and trouble. I fully support the county's initiative to try to define this problem and to get our arms around it. I also want to work with Hooper Irrigation, but their financial problems can't become mine because it flips my subdivision completely upside down. Would love to work with them.
So do you have irrigation rights to this subdivision you're talking about?
I have a combination of Hooper shares that wouldn't do the whole project given the standards that Hooper has in place today. But I also have a couple of these defined surface bodies of water that I can move to accommodate the problems that I have. I have more than enough water if it's done smart and wise that wouldn't just benefit me and my family, would benefit a broader community.
Well, the reason I question that, when I first moved into my house, I moved in front of my house on the edge of the road was a great big canal, a ditch that all the property around my house was irrigated by. And some people flood irrigated and others didn't have the elevation. So I know my family had a great big 8-inch pump there that we operated and irrigated out of. And we had timeshares. It was big enough that it could take the flow of the ditch. And I was on a time. Well, anyway, as a result, I was allowed to put in a small pump and a secondary system of my house. And so when it was our turn, I would simply go out and flip the switch and all the heads would come on. And that's how I watered my yard. And there was enough water in the ditch flowing all the time that I could pretty much, in about a 36-hour period, I could water several times if I wanted to because, the amount of flow out of the ditch was minimal. And that's how I covered my responsibility. But I was on an 8-day cycle, just like everybody else. So after I irrigated, I have to turn it off everything else. And, it was 7 more days before the water come in the ditch. But that worked out just fine. Do you have that capacity where you're at to run a ditch behind all these places and allow them to put a pump in? And would we as the county allow that?
So what you described essentially is how Hooper Irrigation works today. Through this development site that I'm talking about, the Hooper Irrigation Canal runs right through the northern boundary of this development. It's a covered canal, meaning that it's piped with dirt over the top of it. So I have rights out of that canal just like all the other farmers do out there. So the idea would be to take shares out of that are my shares, to put it into a holding pond, as well as bring water either in one of 2 ways from the body of water that I have defined through a surface right through the Utah Division of Water Rights, to either move that to the diversion point with Hooper Irrigation and divert more water into that pond to serve that area, or I can go underground and drill my own deep well to be able to fill that pond to service those 80 lots.
So that canal that's covered, how often is water in that canal?
From typically, I would say, mid-April through October.
Okay, so the canal runs full most of the time.
Full most of the time.
So would they allow you to simply put a pressurized system off that?
Greg and I, as well as Hooper Irrigation, have had conversation around a topic that you mentioned. Why don't we put a larger pond in that area?
Well, not even without a pond. What I mean,
I don't know
when I look at the way Plain City operates today, we operate off the canal that goes out to Willard Bay, and there's water in there all the time, and they allow us to just pump off of it, and as a result, we don't really have to have a pond because the water's there all the time.
I don't know the engineering details of something like that.
You want me to address that?
Is that okay with you two if I do that? Yes, I would like you to address that. Now, Brad, I don't understand. Is this which development is this on? Is this on Cherokee Farms?
Village. And you think of my developments are somewhat large. This is the smaller one. It's 60 acres. What I think most people aren't quite understanding is that it has half of that property is being left of permanent open space.
Yeah.
So it's 80 lots. It's right around the West Weber Elementary School.
Okay.
And there's a large portion of agricultural
Sorry, Brad, that's the
property.
village?
It's the village. There's an agricultural I have to be able to irrigate that 25, 30 acres in addition to providing water for the yards.
This gets more. I forgot about that. This gets a little more complicated.
But I'm gonna save a lot of water because we are going to do a lot of xeriscaping, native landscaping. We're also, even the 25 acres of open space, it's going to be hopefully pressure watered, so we're not flood irrigating, and that's 50% savings there.
Well, that's exactly where I was going. What you're talking about, because if you can pressure irrigate these, well, then when a system does come through, it's really easy and inexpensive to just convert over to it.
That's the idea.
That's what happened in Plain City when we finally decided to put our secondary in. Most connections were pretty slick because everybody was irrigating out of the ditch in front of their house, so they just had to run in the general area and stub up a pipe, and everybody hooked to it, and bingo, we were done. And it was, generally speaking, really slick. There were a few issues, people that had issues, but for the most part, it was not too tough.
I know with the extensive conversations that I've had with the Division of Water Rights, the bigger project that's down along the Weber River, that one I can do exactly what you just described.
Okay. All right.
I've got a question for Mr. Blanch, Mr. Chair.
Oh, well, I kind of called the other guy up, so I think. Please, introduce yourself again.
Greg Siegmiller.
Greg. Sorry, Greg.
So the question is, why can't you just put a pump in the ditch and just run it that way? The reason being is because there are shares and there are cards that have to go out to everybody, and everybody is allocated a certain time. On Hooper Irrigation, it's every 7.5 days that you get a particular share of 45 minutes to use your water. If you're taking your water outside of that allocated time, it's illegal, and hands are slapped and fines are extended. So until a development is large enough to have an entire stream, a full stream, which equates to 3 CFS, they can't just perpetually or continually flow water out of the canal and into a reservoir. I'm dealing with Syracuse City, I believe it is, that wants us to give them a full stream to one of their reservoirs, and they just don't have enough. It's hundreds of connections, much larger than what he has here. So what that means is Mr. Blanch or somebody that he hires would be out there every 7.5 days, sometimes in the middle of the night, opening a gate, running it in, filling the reservoir, shutting it off, and waiting 7.5 days, hoping that will
I understand where you're going. But what happens here, you have carry water they talk about, and that's water that it takes to get the stream to where it's going. And so this carry water is just residual water that exists in the ditch. And when that water is carrying along there, I guess the real question is, do you allocate the full 3.5 CFS when somebody's downstream taking it? Okay.
To my knowledge, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there are some, there are checks and balances. You know, at some point in time, the Division of Water Rights is going to check us. The state engineer is going to check and make sure that we're putting water to property, we're watering what we're getting water and irrigating what we think we should. There are other checks and balances with the state. For example, if my fees are too high, there's checks and balances on the state. And so, you know, we have those things to address. And anyway, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it does answer it. The only where I was driving this is it's obviously operating in other areas, and it would be really nice if you could just simply hook to the ditch and have it pressurized, so the pump would run all the time, and anybody could open up their system all the time, and you could do it through carry water, not through allocated water. But
I wish it worked that way,
but it's not that simple. All right. Sorry, Brad. I was just kind of fishing there. So could you please come back to the mic? Commissioner Harvey had a question for you.
Two things, and this may...
Hold on. Will you restate your name?
Yes, Brad Blanche.
Great.
Thank you, Mr. Blanche. Just for me, and I may know the answer to this question, but I want to make certain I hear it from you. Do you have a will serve from Hooper Water or from any water district for your village project? Do you have, how many do you have?
I have a will serve letter from Taylor West Weber Water. Their requirement, they're already in the area for culinary.
To serve all 80 proposed homes there?
Yeah, they've got a 12-inch line. I think, well, it's a large line in 900 South right there, yes.
So just so that I'm clear, you have a will serve to serve all 80 homes in the village area?
Yes.
Thank you. Next question.
Primary water.
I'm going to call it culinary or primary. Thank you. Either way, thank you very much. Is that?
That's correct.
Thank you. But what we're talking about is the secondary water to those areas. You don't have any will serve or anything for secondary water at this very moment, correct?
Well, I wish I could answer it directly.
So do I.
The answer is yes. I have a will serve from Hooper Irrigation, but in order to do it, Hooper Irrigation is willing to serve it as long as I fund a 16-inch line.
Thank you.
So,
Any other questions?
Not a question, but I think Mr. Blanche brings up a couple of key issues that we need to consider moving forward. Number one would be the standards that we would adopt at some point, which basically would say, look, because you have 3 acres of ground, does not mean you need 3 acre-feet of water or 3 water shares. You need to look at the property that actually is going to be watered based on CC&Rs and other things. So standards become an integral part of this. And the other part that he brings up is if any policy we set, I think, needs to be flexible and allow other uses. We know that ponds, we know that wells, we know that there's other sources of water that property owners have the right to apply for and receive. And so we don't want to limit any property owner to say this is this service district has to be X. We need to give options to these owners across the board. So Mr. Blanche brought up both of those, and I think those are good, Charlie, that we need to make sure that we consider that in the future.
I don't know if I'm popular in saying this out loud. If you want to talk about water, waste, agriculture is where a ton of waste happens. And so we want to service the broader area. I think you all know my area well enough to know that the Central Weber Sewer District's master plan doesn't really service beyond the west side of 4700 West. Development, in my humble opinion, isn't going to happen aggressively west of 4700 West until the sewer situation is better addressed. I don't think secondary water is the same as culinary or sanitary sewer.
Yeah, and our days on the Water Development Commission, Mr. Chair, you remember that over 60%, as I remember, close to 70%, at least a couple years ago, was being used for agricultural purposes.
I think 75.
So it's yeah, Mr. Blanche is correct on that.
I bet he is.
real quickly, Commissioner Harvey, do I have a will serve letter or a will serve commitment? I could give myself one and the state of Utah would support it. I can will serve my own project with my own water. That's the net point that I'm trying to make. So,
Any question there?
I'll reserve it for me.
Okay, great. All right, others in the room who've come to comment on this, please. Could you state your name?
My name is Paul Joyce. I live in Huntsville, Utah, out near the monastery. Pleasure meeting you all, commissioners. Commissioner Frohr, you actually sold my parents their first house here in 1981, so we met when I was 3.
Yeah, that was me in the younger days. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that.
So listen, I've been listening to the conversation, great conversation. I appreciate all the comments. I'm unfortunately one of those unhappy people that we talked about earlier that is in a water situation that has been driven by the code that is at stake here. I moved into a subdivision, built a new house in 2017, in which was a Valley 3, 3 acre, which most of the valley is, and learned the hard way, even though a lot of misinformation from real estate agents and others, that the actual appropriate amount of water to irrigate 3 acres of land is 9 acre feet of water.
Are you in Monastery Cove? Excuse me.
I'm not. I'm in Silver Summit Estates.
Okay, thank you.
So just this way. So it actually takes 9 acre feet of water to irrigate 3 acres of land. You guys probably are aware of this, that the rule is 3 acre feet of water per acre of land. So you get a 3 acre lot, you put a house on it, put a driveway on it, a barn, a pool, maybe you need 7 acre feet of water, but that's still a significant amount of water. So much so, I did some math. I don't know if you guys know how much an acre foot of water is. It's 325,000 gallons of water. So when you talk about 7 acre feet of water to irrigate a lot after you put all those things on, it's literally 20 million gallons of water you pull out of an aquifer every year out of a well. Or you put a load on an existing culinary service provider, a secondary service provider. It's a lot of water that we're actually discussing here. So it's very interesting. By the way, I want to applaud Charlie. I know Charlie, I'm probably a pain in the neck to Charlie at this point. He's heard me loud and clear via emails and voices, but I've spent a significant amount of dollars at this point, over $40,000 in suit against the developer due to I think Charlie in his thing said, the reasonable interpretations of the code as was prior written. So as Hooper Water has come and asked for this change, it has given the Planning Commission an opportunity to rewrite actually all of the code regarding all of this, not only to satisfy Hooper's concerns, but others that I think that are present currently. Very specifically, I will draw your attention to 106.42, which is subdivisions. Part 2 is in required improvements. And what they've done is they've entirely rewritten 106.42 around the water provisions, which are Part A and M, Part A culinary water, Part M secondary, to better satisfy these conditions of where a culinary provider can actually require that there be, if there's a secondary provider within a reasonable distance, that they actually connect to the secondary provider as part of willing to serve the culinary water, which has been the focus of the subject today. The problem with this is that it doesn't address actually when this isn't the case. So in Silver Summit Estates, we are actually not in the service area of a culinary provider. And the new code, the new way that that 106.42 is written, the Planning Commission calls out actually the Utah State Title 17, Chapter 27A, Section 1, which is general provisions, specifically Section 103, which is definitions. And definition 11 says very specifically, a culinary water authority, it uses the word carefully, authority, and this is very important that we look at the nuance of this wording. A culinary water authority means the department, agency, or public entity with the responsibility, I want you to hear that word carefully, responsibility to review and approve the feasibility of the culinary water system and sources for the subject property. That is the definition by state of a culinary water authority. Now, in my case, there is no culinary water provider or authority. The only way that I can get culinary water from my house is to go get an exchange to lease water from Weber Basin Conservatory District, right? And then I go to the Division of Water Rights and I get a well permit to drill a well. And then when the well comes up, the Weber Morgan Health Department goes and checks it and says if it's good for drinking. And then if it's not, I dump a bunch of bleach down. You guys know the drill, right? But ultimately, I get to that culinary water from my family by access of a well through water I lease through the Weber Basin Water Conservatory. The Weber Basin Water Conservatory would not identify itself as a culinary water provider, nor would it identify itself as a culinary water authority. The Weber Basin Water Conservatory would not say that they have the responsibility to review and approve the feasibility of the culinary water system for my home. The Division of Water Rights and the state engineer would accept that responsibility. Okay?
But they collect a fee from me for that water you extract, right?
They do. They lease me that water. You got it, right? But guess who else collects a fee from me? The state of water, the Division of Water Rights, and the state engineer to approve the feasibility that it will work.
Yeah, but their fee isn't ongoing, where Weber Basin's is.
Correct. It's a lease of water. I don't own the water. It's a lease of water. You're absolutely right. So, in the new code that is written, title for Weber County, which is section 10642. Again, we are now talking about development subdivisions, improvements that are required. 10642. It basically defines that the sorry, I'm getting there, guys. It says that for a culinary water, the statement shall come from a culinary water authority pursuant to Title 17, 27A 603. Now, what 603 states from the Utah State Code is it is actually, it is the ordinance that is written around how you approve a subdivision plat, okay? And how you approve a subdivision plat, the section that I just quoted you, 1727A 603 section 2 says that if the plat conforms to the county's ordinances and this part, and has been approved by the Culinary Water Authority, the Sanitary Sewer Authority, and the local health department, then as defined in a separate section, the local health department and county consider the local health department's approval necessary. By the way, the separate section is definition of what a health department is. The county shall approve the plat. So it basically says that a culinary water provider has to actually approve the plat. Okay, is what that section. So the new section of code that was written to replace the old section of code for Weber County, section 106 says that a person acting as this culinary water authority pursuant to the Utah title, is as follows. 1, it can be the local health department for the lots to propose to be served by a private well for the culinary water. Now, I know for a fact the local health department would not identify itself as a culinary water authority or provider. What they do is they inspect the culinary water that comes out of those wells' quality. But they certainly don't have the resources, bandwidth, or oversight, or committees, or people to actually then become the culinary water authority for a lot like mine, in which we're self-serviced out of a well. So that doesn't make any sense from that perspective of the code. It says, or number 2, an existing culinary water service provider. Now, listen to the wording that we've changed. We've now changed from culinary water authority to culinary water provider, which does not exist in the case of my subdivision, or a brand new subdivision that is going up right behind me right now, okay? Or it says if the culinary water authority is being newly formed, right, like we're gonna go build one so we can service these definitions, then we need the owner of that water company to sign something that says he's gonna be willing to do this. No problem. So already we're into a bunch of chaos that's gonna require more lawsuits, okay? Then it goes on to say that the statement from this culinary water authority shall provide an acknowledgement of all intended uses of the culinary water, including but not limited to fire suppression, applicable secondary water uses as provided in section 10642. So in 10642, there is a subsection, part M, which is titled secondary water. Now I'm in the root of section 10642. 10642A having to do with all the details of culinary water. 10642M, secondary water. Okay, the interpretation of this code is in secondary water. It says, as a preface section to all of the subsections, 10642M, secondary water, when acting as a culinary water authority pursuant to 1727A603, which again was the Utah title around approving of plats, the culinary water service provider may require that a secondary water system serve some or all the lots within the subdivision as a condition of committing to serve culinary water. Now, this is what we've been talking about today, that the culinary water provider have the ability to say, I will not serve you unless you go use that secondary water, which is in a reasonable distance for you to get to. Now, in my case, I do not have a culinary water authority or provider. I have a well, but I am in the service area of a secondary provider. I am in the service area of a ditch company that I could easily get water to, or reasonably, not easily, reasonably get water to. So it goes on to say that a private well, unless otherwise by part 2 of the same section, this is part 1, may be approved by, hey, we can go out and get a geological survey or some capacity survey, et cetera, et cetera. But part 3 says, hey, we're going to review some of the logs, which was presented by Charlie earlier. And the problem is that I'm in an existing subdivision where we are pull out of our wells, and we approve a new subdivision literally 1,000 feet from my subdivision of 9 3-acre lots, which literally means we're going to approve these guys to take tens of millions of gallons of water out of the same aquifer that I'm pulling out of with really no ability to besides to say, let's review Paul's well log and see if he has water. I might have water today, but am I going to have water after they pull 27 million additional gallons of water out of that aquifer?
Well, and we don't, the well permits that they get to operate here don't delineate or clarify between primary and secondary use.
They do. So when I go to Weber Basin Water Conservatory and I lease my 1 acre foot of water, they only sell 1 acre foot of water. It comes to me and it says 0.5 acre feet of that 1 acre foot of water will be dedicated to your domestic unit. The other 0.55 acre feet I can use of my choosing. Irrigation, stock water, and others that they allow. If you choose nothing, they will dedicate that 0.55 acre feet of water, of that 1 acre feet that you lease from them, to irrigation. And on your actual exchange in the Division of Water Rights, it will say approval for irrigation of 1.833 acres. 1.833 acres is 0.55 acre feet of water divided by 3. It takes 3 acre feet of water for 1 acre of land. So they absolutely do delineate.
Okay, then where in this concept do we anticipate you're going to get the irrigation water for your other 2.5 acres?
So this is the problem at hand. So we don't have a culinary provider. We don't have anybody to say you must hook up to the secondary provider, Mr. Developer. So what I have is a ditch company that's 4,000 feet away from my house that I actually have shares in and no ability to get to it because the code didn't require the developer to utilize those secondary resources. The way that the code reads and is written is it says the developer has to provide a culinary and a secondary source. So what happens is the developer goes and writes a contract with Weber Basin Water Conservatory for 1 acre foot of water, hands it to poor unsuspected person like Paul Joyce who buys a 3 acre lot of land and says, yeah, you got water, you have primary, you have culinary and secondary water. How much water do I actually have? I have my domestic unit and enough to water 8,000 square feet, 1.833 acres, not 145,000 square feet that I need. So at that time, what are my options? My options are to go back to the Water Conservatory and say, hey, I need 7 more acre feet of water. You know what that cost is today? It's $476 an acre foot. It's $4,000 a year on my property taxes so that I can irrigate my lawn because the code doesn't demand that the developer utilize the secondary water resources in the case that there isn't a culinary water provider. The code only defines, as written, the new version of the code defines only in the case that a culinary water provider or authority demands that secondary water is used does the developer have to do it. In my case, there is nobody to demand that, so I'm hosed. And you know what I have? Another $40,000 in lawsuits against the developer right now on my bill. And it's far from over. This is a huge problem that we're missing. Now, I want to draw your guys' attention to the old code, the code that actually exists today, okay, that is not amended as part of this. Part M says the term secondary water shall mean furnished for other than culinary purposes. Pretty simple. It says where a subdivision is proposed within an existing culinary water district or service area of an existing water corporation or within a water district or water corporation service area created to serve such subdivision, okay? It's literally, if secondary water is available, it says you have to use it. That's what the old code used to say. Now, I'm in a lawsuit because of misinterpretation of this code. Now, Charlie acknowledged in his report, I think very perfectly, that obviously if I'm in a lawsuit, it's open for some misinterpretation here, right? It's open for, hey, I read it a different way than you do. The county, when I brought this to the Ogden Valley Planning Commission and others' attention months ago, said, we believe that the interpretation of this code is only if you're in a culinary water provider service area or culinary water authority service area, either one. I'm going to mix and match those terms now. I'm not either, and our code doesn't address it. Our code used to. When this code was written, it's absolutely clear that the intention of the code was to say, if you're going to pull your culinary water out of a well, if you don't have a culinary water provider and you have to go drill a well and you are in the service area of a secondary provider, you got to use it. It only makes sense. It only makes sense to preserve our natural resources. It only makes sense not to put that load on the aquifer. It only makes sense not to get in fights with our neighbor about sharing water and pulling tens of millions of gallons out of the aquifer and putting it at risk. I have in our area, because there's no culinary provider, we also don't have any fire hydrants. So I was required by code to put in a fire suppression system in my house. Now, I don't know if you guys have ever had to go through that, but a fire suppression system, do you know what it has to flow? It has to flow 26.4 gallons per minute. That's a lot for a shallow well. Now, shallow well, you said earlier 30 feet. Shallow well, actually, my well in my house is 160 feet, also considered a shallow well by definition. Okay? I'm in an aquifer that they're building a subdivision across the way that our code is allowing them to get 1 acre-feet of water contracts with the Weber Basin Water Conservatory, and they are in an existing secondary service provider area, and our code is not demanding that developer use that secondary infrastructure. It's a problem.
So what size, physically size, do you have to put in your house to flow that 26.8 gallons?
You are required to flow 2 heads by the fire marshal. Each head is 13.1 gallons per minute.
Yeah, but physically the size of the pipe, do you put in the...
Oh, I think it was 1.5 inches or something throughout my house. It was $15,000 to put in a 13D suppression system when I built my house. So that's fine, by the way. I walked into it knowing I'd have to put in a 13D. Like, this was not a surprise to me. Fine. What was a surprise to me is that most of the wells in that area won't even produce 15 gallons a minute, and I had to produce 26.4 gallons a minute at 40 PSI for 3 minutes.
So how did they get away with it when you had to
What was that?
provide it? Putting in a smaller well.
I'm sorry, ask your question again. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, you had to flow 26 and they had to flow 13.
No. Each head is 13.1 gallons per minute, and you have to flow 2 heads to get approval today.
Okay, so how did you said their wells wouldn't produce that?
So I'm just talking wells in the general area that also didn't require 13D systems.
Okay, we're not in the
Yeah,
subdivision.
so you have to be over
Okay, I
5,000 square
misunderstood
foot
that.
home.
Right.
So there's actually a well that's about 2,000 feet from my house, of a house that's under 5,000 square
Right,
feet.
right.
But they utilize the well and have the rights actually as a point of diversion. They had rights. It wasn't a share in a company. It was actually a water right. So, by the way, I think you guys understand the nuance there, but a lot of people say, they say water rights, but they mean water shares, which are not the same thing, right? Shares and ownership of a company that owns a water right. I don't own the water right. I own shares in a company that owns water, right? Anyway, no pun intended. Anyway, they actually have a diversion point which they irrigate at a couple thousand feet from my house, and it dries up, which really isn't the point at hand here. The point I want to draw to your attention here is the code as written and the code as rewritten as part of your approval today would not address this major concern that people are spending tens of hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend because our code isn't actually doing a job at addressing this issue, and it is making us not neighborly, bluntly, and I hate to say it like that, but you know, there's some big time fighting going on in the valley because our code is not addressing this problem, and we continue to dig in and clarify the exactness of our wording when we are within a culinary water authority or provider, which is what WEBER asked for us to do, and I think Charlie has done a fantastic job. By the way, the rewrite of the code is miles better than the old one, but we are still far from a position where you guys should be approving it.
Very good questions, commissioners.
So just so I'm clear, you wouldn't mind. So you talked about the old code and the new code.
Yes,
So
current
you said
code.
old code,
It's
you're
not old
talking
yet.
about current code.
Yes, correct.
And you think that current code does address the situations with the well or not? I mean, you read the interpretation through 10642, whatever.
Yeah, so I read you guys the current code. My impression of that code is it's crystal clear.
Okay.
When I brought it to the county's attention, they told me I was incorrect, and it wasn't crystal clear, and it was only in context of if you were in the area or district of a culinary water authority or provider, which is why I'm in suit with the developer and maybe shortly the county.
So your testimony would say we would need to take a look at that section to make sure it's clarified that it deals with private wells, which I agree with you.
So as part of this proposal, that entire section has been redlined, all of it, and rewritten. And it has been rewritten to dig in on only in the context of being in a culinary water provider or any of these things required. Most of the lots that are being developed, at least in my area, in my corner over by the monastery over there, we are not in the service area of a culinary water provider. And it is causing major, major problems. And the code is getting further away from the initial intent, in my humble opinion, of the code.
That's great testimony.
That is great.
Thank you for that, sharing that with us.
I have a question for
Okay,
Mr. Joyce. Just to be
hold
clear
on a
for me.
second. Commissioner?
You know, in other parts of the valley, I learned from water engineers that a different aquifer can exist 300 feet away. You made a statement, and they used 300 feet. You made a statement that you're going to draw from the same aquifer.
Yeah.
I want to just understand, how can you validate that statement?
So I'm dying for this report that was due out from UGS in 2017 as well. So my data would only be to the last UGS report, which was published in 1996. I have read every one of the 300 pages of that study, and they have some very detailed maps of the aquifer systems up there. I say I'm certainly not a water expert, and they're generalized. But in general, there is a shallow aquifer in that area of that valley in the corner over there. And then there is what they call the commercial or deep aquifer, a primary aquifer that is about 400 to 500 feet or further down. And that general shallow aquifer, as defined in the UGS 1996 study, was all the same. Now, are there little pockets of water? I've had no problem actually with my pump running dry to date, and as I told you, I have a neighbor a couple thousand feet away pulling from the same aquifer that has during a dry season. They're building a brand new subdivision literally 1,000 feet away from me with 9 3-acre lots, which I'm drawing a lot of concern, but it's only from the generalization that in that portion of the valley where I live, there are 2 aquifers. There's a shallow and a primary aquifer.
I just wanted to make sure that I understood your comment correctly. Thank you.
Is there more water in one or the other? Probably, fairly enough.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
We appreciate that. Others who've come to comment on this?
Good morning, Commissioners. I didn't plan on speaking on this, but as it hits close to home, you know I have to engage in this conversation. I am Lori Brinkerhoff. I'm current mayoral candidate out in Hooper City. And great conversation today, great conversation. But I think one point of view as we listen to these conversations is obviously we have Hooper Irrigation, a privately owned entity, and we're hearing the request for our water of that water from that corporation to go to a different development. If I were to represent, it would be the citizens of Hooper. That would be my role as a mayoral candidate. Just to bring to your attention kind of the current status of the demands being placed on Hooper. Currently, there is a subdivision off of 4700 that has come to a standstill. It's been declared a dry subdivision because right now there are not, and I hate to misspeak, I have experts here, and I hate to misspeak and incorrectly make any claims, but I have been told that there are no water shares attached to this development. And so that this development is just one of many, and Hooper it's come to a standstill. Also, I would draw to your attention, we currently have over 800 applicants currently from this calendar year of developers wanting to build individually. And as you drive down the main thoroughfare 5900.
So 800, you're talking about individual lots?
Individual lots that have come before the Planning and Zoning Commission. Also, if you drive through Hooper from 4,000 down to 5,900, literally every square inch is for sale. I know from the corner of Hooper Elementary going out to our Davis County line, there must be 86 acres there for sale. So there is going to be a great future demand for water and future potential development in Hooper. So I would just say if Hooper residents were here, we would raise all kinds of red flags. We would say, we're down line. Why are you going to consider servicing other individuals, other developments without that water coming here first? So yeah. I mean, great discussion, but I would support an RFP. I just think if there's other sources available to Mr. Blanche and this development, I just think it's good policy to consider RFP.
Very good. Thank you, Lori. It was good to hear from you. Others? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. Ruby Ricassi from Eden. I didn't want to have to speak, but since nobody from Eden was here, I thought I should. I am the secretary for the Eden Irrigation Company, and when the Ogden Valley Planning Commission met, there were our company president was here and spoke, and also the Eden Waterworks Company. And I'd just like to reinforce one of my favorite sayings for years, is that for every complex problem, there is a solution that is simple, neat, and wrong. And we have, you know, our situation is unique like some of the others. We have a 1860 water right that was 7 lateral ditches, open canal, still the same because we don't have enough fall to pressurize. We get water from the North Fork River, and we buy water from WEBER Basin that comes out of the Ogden Valley Canal. For Eden Culinary, Eden Waterworks, to have to say...
Now, hold on. Could you go back? Eden Culinary
is Eden Waterworks.
Okay, so different...
Completely different. So
Very
Eden
good.
Waterworks is the culinary provider. Eden Irrigation provides to some of Eden where the...
But you're secondary.
Secondary,
Okay,
correct.
good.
So, now I've lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. What I believe, and I'm not nearly as versed on the numbers and everything of the current regulation and the proposed one or law or whatever title it has, for the culinary to be able to say, this person has 5 shares of secondary, so it's adequate for their secondary needs, is very hard because Eden Irrigation can't tell anybody how many shares of water they need to irrigate a certain amount of ground because the water varies with the year, it varies with the ditch. All I can tell you is how many minutes of water you get every week and 6 hours based on the number of shares you have. And the joke I like to tell people when they ask if so many shares are enough to water this much is, well, do you plan to dryland farm or are you going to grow rice? And then the question becomes, if you're not going to dryland farm, then I can't tell you how many acre feet you get in a year or even how many acre feet you get in a week because it fluctuates continually and the only place it's measured is when the water comes in. So it's really complicated, and that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon or morning still. My name's Nate Hadley. I'm the manager of the Uinta Highlands Improvement District. We provide water and sewer for over there.
What's your name again?
Nate Hadley.
It's nice to meet you, Mr.
Nice
Hadley.
to meet you. There's just a few things that when we went through the provision or the changes that were being proposed, it mentions that the pre-application meeting is required for any new subdivision, and I can't say for other districts within the county, but our experience is we would love to be included in those application meetings, or when those, a lot of times we get, hey, I need a permit from the county. I'm at that point. I need you to get a will serve letter for me. And we don't find out until right then that they're even going to be able to build in the area. Another thing, we've always had, we've had an issue with that we can't, there's not a place on the plat for us to even to sign to approve the water, to approve the plat for the subdivision, or even if it's just a single lot subdivision. And it also states, the new ordinance states that the culinary water service provider bears full responsible for verifying the secondary water system's capabilities to satisfy that. We have a problem with that. Like, we should, I mean, we go and make sure that we inspect the sewer connection, the water connection. We don't inspect the electrical connection. We don't inspect the power connection or the gas. That should be up to the secondary water company. If they're going to provide secondary water, they should be inspecting that responsibility for the connection of the secondary water. You did mention earlier that if there was with the culinary water, if people were watering with culinary water, their size of their lines aren't big enough. There is actually a state, if people in our area watered with culinary water, we would have to increase our size of our reservoirs because we're only sized for culinary. And when we give a will serve letter, it states that they have to have secondary water in order to build. So
very good.
Those are just my few comments.
Thank you, Nate.
Thank you.
It's nice to meet you. You're providing services for county residents.
Yes.
There.
Unincorporated, right.
Yeah, unincorporated. And, you know, I've never met you before.
Well, I've been there for 3 years. I've met you before. I used to live out in Plain City. I grew up out there. So,
who's your dad?
Ken Hadley.
Ken Hadley.
Yeah.
Nate, I know you now. I
that's
can
a
make
big
the
smile,
connection.
So,
Huh? Yeah. It was me and Ken that drove the Plain City Fire Department starting and pushed for the secondary system out there. Huh? He was a great city councilman. He had a good vision of the future.
That's good. Thank you.
You bet. Him and Georgine.
Yep.
That's right. Thanks, Nate. It was good to see you. Others who have come to testify today. All right, so let me tell you, this is running way over where we thought it was.
Oh, you're not kidding.
Charlie, we shouldn't have 3 items on a public hearing.
Unfortunately, my desire to operate efficiently turns into non-efficiency for you guys. I'm sorry.
Right. So let me tell you what I want to do. I want to go out of this public hearing and address this right now. And then the people here to deal with water can leave. And then I want to come back in after we take a 5-minute break. Because it's potty time for me.
You have a water issue?
Yeah, I have a water issue. We've been here a long time. And then I want to skip and go down to the solar overlay zone. Because that's the next one here that there's a fair amount of people to deal with. So if there's no complaint there by you folks, by you commissioners, I'd like to do that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'll make the motion that we adjourn our public hearing and reconvene the public, adjourn our public hearing and reconvene a public meeting to discuss item 3 only, or on the next one would be for H2, 7H2.
Right, 7H2. Very good. There's a motion
Second that.
and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're no longer in a public hearing, just so you understand. So public comments have ceased. So, Charlie, we're back to making action on this. So I want to speak up first and let you know, I think this has been presented to us too soon. I feel you guys are woefully unprepared for what's happened here. I don't view the Planning Commission as even close to have done the background that needs to be done on this this topic. As you can see, this is monstrous. I knew I had a good feel for the issue here, but I didn't realize how big it went and how far it went. And I think we need to have some joint hearings with the Planning Commission on this, a joint meeting where we can sit and talk about this and some things that I think need to be done. Earlier on, I said I thought we needed to write them a letter. I'm of the opinion now that this goes beyond a letter. There's too much here. We've got to have some meetings and discuss this and talk about directions that they need to go and things they need to do. And I'd like to see it done pretty darn quick, because we obviously have people waiting in the wings for this. So that's my opinion, Commissioners.
You ready for a motion?
Would you like to make one?
I would be willing to.
Okay.
So I would move to table agenda item H2, dealing with the land use issue related to culinary and secondary water requirements in the subdivision as presented today by Mr. Ewert. But I'd like to speak to that motion.
Please.
And give some direction as requested. So I would request or give direction to staff that we do, just as the chair suggested, and set up a meeting within the next 30 days with the planning commissions and give them some direction, and in particular discuss the items that were brought up today. Dealing with private wells, I think, is a huge concern. We need to address the issue that was brought up with alternative areas, alternative sources of water that could be used. We need to look at standards. We need to look at really what the realistic viewpoint that developers, homeowners look at, and particularly the homeowners once they get into these subdivisions, and what they're prepared to either have or not prepared. The taxpayer, the homeowners, are the ones that take the short end of the stick on this in a lot of cases. We need to make sure they're protected. So I would move to table under that basis and I'm not going to put a time certain in it other than we need to have that meeting with them in the next 30 days to go from there.
Commissioners?
Yes.
May I ask a question? Maybe a word of advice. Would it be more appropriate to sit down with the commissioners individually or together in a work session yourselves to walk through the ordinance as proposed? I've actually got a number of things that I wrote down here that I can speak straight to. I don't think we have time for that today. That we actually did accommodate for in the ordinance. I think there's a little bit of misunderstanding. I would certainly like to sit down with each of you and make sure it's very clear what's before you before we go back to the Planning Commission.
I'd like to hear those maybe in a work session.
Yeah, I'd say I think that's exactly what we need to do. I would encourage, we need to set that up on one of our Monday meetings.
Yeah, we'll put that on one of our next Monday meetings to do that very thing.
Perfect.
Just get with the staff, Charlie. They'll schedule that for you.
You
So I
got
have
it.
a motion,
I'll second.
and I have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passed unanimously. So we're going to take a 5-minute break. Be right back.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn our public meeting and go back to a public hearing to discuss item number 4 on the agenda, please.
And probably 3.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. Item 3 and item 4. My mistake.
4 first.
First, right.
Yeah. Item 4 and item 3 in that order.
So I have a motion.
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
We're back in a public hearing. Very good, Charlie. Now, we want to switch and go to the solar overlay next.
You've got it. And Commissioners, I'm short on time. I apologize. I'm going to be really quickly.
Please.
Be quick here and then let
I
Rick
double Dutch
follow
dare
up.
you. Go ahead.
Staff, Planning Commission, we're all recommending approval of this one. Solar renewable energy resources are a great thing. It's a request to provide the solar overlay on about 300 acres of property or so out west. We've got the Stratus Solar, who's the applicant, and the landowner here in the room. We have negotiated a development agreement with Stratus Solar and the landowner, and we have, I think we have final agreement on how this is supposed to work and operate. This is right next door to the Ogden Bird Refuge, the Ogden Bay area. And so we wanted to make sure that the birds were pretty well protected if there were any issues out here. But we're taking a piece of property that was grazed and turning it into a solar generation, which I think is a fantastic idea.
Can you go back one? Yeah, right there.
Sure.
So basically, oh, actually got to go back one more. Right, so on our left, well, near's two, that's the original one, and the overlay zone is being proposed now is the one on the right.
So it's actually the same thing, it's just one's zoomed.
Oh, it's just larger, I see that now, okay. I'm with you.
Actually, if you
So,
look at this one here.
can you show us where the specific solar farm is in there?
Sure can. So take a look at that shape. Okay. See the black lines? Those are the panels. Those are the rows of panels.
Okay, go back. Okay, so it pretty much takes the whole thing.
Yeah, and actually, I should clarify, this is an old image. It actually takes, you see my mouse? It cuts off right about right there if I were to draw a line north-south. And so this area here would not be included inside of it.
Okay, and how much distance is there between the back of those properties? I assume those are residences.
It's a few hundred feet.
A few hundred feet.
Yeah, from 7,500 to the imaginary line I just drew, that's a quarter section.
A quarter of a section.
Of a section property section.
Okay.
Or sorry, it's a quarter, not a quarter.
Okay.
Quarter.
So an eighth.
Okay, very good. All right, is that your presentation?
Go back one click.
That is the presentation. I was
Max
double dot
10
there.
feet, good. What's the elevation of the panel from the ground?
15 feet tall. When it's at full vertical, they do rotate with the sun. So when the sun's overhead, they're going to be flatter and lower. When the sun's rising or setting, they're going to be upright at about 15 feet tall.
This particular slide shows 10 feet at the apex and not 15. Am I missing something?
We'll want to speak directly with the applicant about that. Actually,
Thank you.
I think
Okay.
you're right. They said 10 in our development agreement. We allowed up to 15 just in case they need some height differences.
Thank you.
Stay above
Very
vegetation
good.
or whatever.
Charlie, does that development agreement require any fenced-in area to screen this from public view?
So we, in favor of, as an alternative to screening, we just talked about distance. So as long as they're several hundred feet away from the nearest existing residence, we didn't require any kind of screening. They are going to have a security fence. It's just going to be a chain link fence. We asked them to treat it so it's not a shiny chain link fence, so it looks a little more aged. If they do end up doing any kind of accessory buildings, we ask for those buildings to look agriculture in nature and not be any taller than what's allowed in the A3 zone, which is 35 feet. I suspect as you look over this from the adjacent properties, you're going to be able to see well over it. You will be able to see it, but you'll be able to see over it, so it's not going to block significant views.
So what's the development agreement say in event somebody builds closer to 700 feet?
That would be I guess first come, first serve, I suppose, would be the easy way to answer that.
Well, I'd like to see some requirements in there that if that happens, it's up to the developer to put that in. It's not up to a neighbor to fence somebody else's property.
Oh, they'll have a fence up. They'll definitely have the fence up. It's
I'm
just
not talking about screening.
Okay, yeah. And we could certainly add that in.
Yeah, there needs to be a provision in there that it's very clear that if somebody moves within 700 feet, that it's up to the developer, the owner, to screen it, not the neighbor.
Okay, perfect. The property just to the north, we've actually got a development proposal coming in, so there will be homes that abut this on the back.
Commissioner, could you explain screening, what you mean by that?
Well, there just has to be some type of screen that people, whatever that is, whether it's the chain link with slats through, just so that you don't have visual impact.
So you no longer can see them?
No longer, yeah.
Okay.
If there's a subdivision there, we're going to hear complaints that at some point, or they're going to come back and say, why did you allow that with the screen? And I'm okay with your 700 feet, but that's not going to be there forever. Yeah, I don't think it needs to be, we need to specify, it just needs to be able to shield or from vision. You've got language in code that states that now.
Yeah, and we could certainly add that in.
Yeah.
They're from the property boundary to the fence line that they're going to put up, they're going to be 100 feet away from that. So they'll be at least 100 feet away from any adjacent residential property.
So is it the residence or the residential property?
It's any subdivision or residential property, yeah. Any future subdivisions that are approved closer than the 700 feet.
Okay.
Does that make sense, Charlie?
It does. Perfect.
Very
So today
good.
you've got 2 items for action. If you want a table to get that language in there, we certainly can. The first one is an ordinance approving the rezone. The second one is a contract for that has the development agreement on it.
Commissioner Harvey, you got anything?
No, I kind of like the idea of taking them both because one applies to the other.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're now in a public hearing, so others who have come to testify to this, please. Is the developer here? Doug, either of you care to address this?
Matthew Neeson with Strata Solar, Moab, Utah. I'd like to start out 10 foot on the height, not 15, for the top of the panels. And we're fine with the screening for the slats and the chain link fence. And then I think I'd like to start out just by answering any questions you may have, or if you'd like to
So
give you an
these slats
overview.
in the fence, as people develop around you and move in, you'll have to go back and do those occasionally.
Improvements, yeah.
Right.
Okay, that's good. No, I don't have, do you have any questions, commissioners? Either of you?
I think that satisfies me as long
Yeah,
as,
you've been here several times, and we've been to the planning commission meeting and heard this, so I don't have any questions.
I think we're fairly familiar with it.
Love having this in Weber County.
All right, thank you.
gentlemen.
Anybody else who's come to comment on this? We don't know why you folks are here, if you're just listening or wanting to comment, but you're welcome to. Oh, you own the property? Oh, that's good. Yeah, well, it's good to have you here, and we're excited what you're doing out there. Well, very good. If that's the case, I'd just soon get out of the public hearing and approve this.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a request. We have a motion to adjourn our public hearing and reconvene a public meeting.
Very good. Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We're in a public, back into a regular meeting. Very good. So the public meeting's closed. We've heard everything. I'm ready for action.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I'll make a motion that we approve item number 7H3.
4.
I was going to say 7H3 and 7H4. Both of them. They tied together?
Yeah, they're tied together here.
So I was just going to say, unless well, let me rephrase. I think we need to do 7H3 first, I think we need to do that part of the governmental action first before we can approve 7H4. So my motion would be, and because we didn't approve or we stayed or delayed the H2, my motion would be to approve item number 7H3 or ordinance number 13. Fatima, is that correct?
Yes.
You know, the problem we have is I didn't hold the public hearing on H3.
No.
Yeah.
Right.
Specifically called out H4.
All we've discussed is H4.
Right.
So, all right, well, can we do H4 without having the public hearing? So, Mr. Chair,
right.
I'll make a motion, then we reopen public meeting to convene a public hearing.
Second.
Okay, I want to apologize to the public. That was my mistake.
No,
One comment that I do have, isn't H3 the junk ordinance?
H3 is the junk ordinance. I don't know how. I
oh,
don't
I'm
see how to
sorry,
relate it.
my bad. I thought it had to do with what Charlie said. We had to do the thing, so.
I questioned that, but I should have.
I'm sorry, my bad. I'll retract my motion to reconvene, and so we're back. I'll retract my motion.
All right, so if that's the case, why don't you just make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve item number 7H4 or ordinance number 13. To approve the ordinance, the developmental agreement by between the Weber County and the Solar Overlay Zone for property located at 1700 South and 7500 West.
I'll second that with the approval, the approval that it was brought up in the previous meeting in regarding the fence and the shielding.
I'm sorry, Gage. You're right.
So that needs to be included in the findings.
And I'll amend my motion to include that fence.
With that included, and it's clear to the developer what the requirements are, that I'm relying on staff to make that clear, I'll second.
Very good. Mr. Grover, do you have any question about what he's expecting there?
Nope. We got the screening and
Okay. I'll call it then. All in favor, say aye.
Nope, ordinance.
Oh,
Ordinance.
okay, that's true. Go ahead, Fatima.
Commissioner Harvey?
Aye.
Commissioner Farrar?
Aye.
Chair Jenkins?
Aye. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, that's approved. Very good.
That was 13, right?
That was 13.
So now we're on to ordinance 14, which is the junk ordinance.
Well, I'll make a motion now to
Go back into a public hearing.
adjourn a public meeting and reconvene a public hearing.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're back in a public hearing. Tim, we kept you a long time today. You're going to leave us?
Tim, we're not done yet. We're going to talk about your favorite, junk.
Junk.
Very good. All right, we're back in a public meeting, hearing, and Mr. Grover, we're going to turn it over to you. You're going to cover for Charlie on this?
Thank you. For many years, you know that there's always been a bit of a code enforcement issue here in Weber County.
Right.
And right now, how our code enforcement ordinance is written is that we send out a notice and then we work with them. There's no fines that they receive, and then it ultimately ends up in court if they don't comply. However, because our code enforcement officer is so efficient and good at this, Iris, back there, we haven't had that many items go to court. She's been able to solve them outside of court and get them addressed. But then there are some larger ones that it's hard to get their attention because they're making so much money on the violation that they're doing that it doesn't matter if they go to court. They're not concerned about that. But we're trying to get their attention even more. And so what we've done is we've put language in place that's before you at this time that's going to look at fines and liens that will go on their property to help this process expedite itself. What you have before you, a few of those things is we send out the first notice, which is typically a 14-day notice, and then after that, we start the fining. And the first fine is a $100 violation per day. The second is a $200 violation per day, and then the third is $400. And then if we don't get their attention at that time, then liens are placed on their property, and this is not to create a revenue generation or anything like that for the county. It's just to clean up some of these unsightly areas. And that's the main gist of this ordinance. We have some other things in there that deal with weeds and things like that, but that's the main gist of the ordinance that you're looking at. Any questions, commissioners?
Questions, Commissioner?
Yeah, just one question, if I could. So would this deal with our issue in the valley with our situation with the storage units that is out of code, i.e. they're using outside storage when it's not allowed?
Yeah, we'd be able to go to those situations and address them. Also dealing with nightly rentals, those type of operations, we're going to be able to use this to address those. We have some issues up in the canyon where we have some junk cars that are an issue that we're working on. It will get their attention a lot quicker when we have these mechanisms in place.
Yeah, and I applaud this. This is long needed, commissioners, that to take somebody into court, and Iris does a fantastic job with limited tools. It just gives another tool, and a lot of times you're not going to get any attention of any owner until they see it in the pocketbook. So I think this was a great ordinance.
Also, too, as both the planning commissions reviewed it, they were very much in favor of it as well, and they have a favorable recommendation before you.
Boy, it sounds like since the planning commission's there and giving Iris a little more teeth there, and really our whole thing is to just make sure people take care of what they have. So I think that's great. I don't have any comment other in this portion of our agenda, Mr. Chair.
Well, I have a couple questions. So give me the fee amounts again.
The first one is $100. Let me just pull it back up again.
It's right here, line number
$100
180.
for the first citation per day.
Per day.
Second is $200 violation per day, and then the third subsequent citation is $400.
And how much time between them?
Between those, Iris,
Usually
typically?
Typically once we...
Why don't you come up you got to be heard. Sorry. So state your name and the position you hold.
My name is Iris Hennon, and I'm the Code Enforcement Officer for unincorporated Weber County. So first I send out a notice, and I have to wait 2 weeks. And it's not really 2 weeks. It's actually about between 30 and 45 days because I send it certified. What I like to do, as well as sending it certified, is actually knock on the door and speak to the person and hand them a notice as well. So I like to do double duty.
So the first notice they get is when they got a fine?
No, the first notice they get will be telling them to address this situation and to contact our office and to have a discussion about it. And then within that first notice, they're also given the ordinance that me as the code enforcement officer think that they're violating. Right. So they have an opportunity to address that. And at that opportunity, they have to clean it up. Now, if you're talking about somebody that has 3 acres of junk, and I've dealt with cleanups that have been 3 acres, you're not going to get them to clean up in a week. You have to give them a bit of a timeline. Right. And at that time, we'll discuss the timeline, what sounds reasonable and what's fair. And as long as they're making progress, and what I typically do is once a week go out there, have a chat, see how things going, and we establish a line of communication, and the progress continues. Now, if they... So then the ticket comes after... Right. Things aren't happening. Yes.
That's
so
all
when,
I wanted to establish.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. That's you've done a great job.
I've been working on this for 10 years to come before you, so I'm so grateful and so excited that you're willing to hear this new ordinance that Rick and Charlie and the attorney's office and myself have collaborated on.
So I imagine I'm the only one here that's ever got one of those notices.
I don't know.
I had, we were excavating a piece of property to build a building on in Weber County, and I had 10,000 yards of dirt in a mountain. And they were hauling that dirt off. And I got one of these notices saying, what do you think it was? Noxious weeds.
Yeah.
There you go.
You got seeds in that dirt, weed seed, and you can't haul it off. Well, good night. We went into a panic mode. We were selling that and hauling it daily, and 10,000 yards. That's a mountain, a freaking mountain. And man, we just couldn't get rid of it at that point because just nobody could take it anymore. So now all of a sudden, I'm looking at a project that's going to be this used to cover that's going to be covered. And we were fortunate, a couple projects came along and we were able to haul it out and use it on it. But they were doing some ditches and they had to put it in to fill the ditch. But it had to be low enough that they could cover it, but with a secondary cover of topsoil that was legitimate. Anyway, I'm just telling you.
Commissioner,
I felt like that was baloney at the time, but here I am.
Commissioners, I do want to let you know that somebody that's in violation of a nightly rental, when we go through all this process and they still do it, and we end up in court, it's a $90 fine. And they'd rather come to court every other month and pay the $90 than they would not have their nightly rentals. And so there's no teeth. There's no teeth. And I'm like a bad relative to some of the citizens of the county because I keep showing up, And so this affords an opportunity of having a different kind of a conversation.
They don't leave crumpets out for you.
No crumpets.
Well, Iris, we're sorry to make you sit here all the way till 12:35.
No, I just really appreciate it. I really appreciate this opportunity of coming before you about this ordinance. It's very close to my heart. As I said, I've been trying for 10 years to to come and speak about this. And Commissioner Ford knows that he and I have walked a property or two to.
We have.
So.
And we appreciate your work.
You're great, Iris. We appreciate your work so much.
Well, thank you.
You bet. All right, is there anybody here who'd care to testify? I don't see anybody here. So we could bring that back to this point. Rick, are you closed? Are you done?
Yes.
Yep. Mr. Chair, I'll make the motion. We adjourn our public hearing, reconvene a public hearing.
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We're back in the regular meeting.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion we approve ordinance number 14, dealing with land use code, updating provisions to enforcement of land use, and including junk and refuge standards.
Second.
And that's item H3 on our agenda.
H3.
Yes.
Right. Very good. Any questions to that or comments? I see none, so I'll call it. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Ordinance.
Oh, ordinance. I'm
Fatima.
sorry. Fatima, we'll turn it to you.
Okay, Commissioner Harvey.
Aye.
Commissioner Furr.
Aye.
And Chair Jenkins.
Aye. Thank you, ma'am. All right. Commissioner comments. Anybody want to say anything? How about a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. We're adjourned. Whew. Man, long meeting today.